Hello, this is Dr. Shane Mohammed, geopolitical scientist and lecturer. I invite you to join me for a new exciting show on IETV, 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. The Real Politique is not an ordinary talk show, but one of education, enlightenment, and examination. Here we discuss not just the surface issues, but the factors, shortcomings, and lack of will to change the socio-economic and political realities facing our nation. We ask the hard questions, seek out the difficult answers, whilst at the same time creating a space for dialogue and discussion which all of society can learn, understand, and hopefully respond actively and for the greater good of the Republic. This is the Real Politique. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of The Real Politique. It is indeed a pleasure for me to join you once again. We are in the last quarter of 2022, can you believe it? And as we begin Season 2 of The Real Politique, we are going to start discussing the issues that touch and concern finances, the labor movement, because in a matter of a few days, we will be having our Finance Minister, the Honorable Carl Mimbert, present the 2022-2023 fiscal budget. And there's much to be expected in that budget. As we look at the price of gas, natural gas on the international market, the price of oil on the international market, and where does Trinidad and Tobago, where is it positioned? Where are we positioned in terms of the opportunities that are out there for us and the opportunities that we are not taking and should be taking. Tonight, I'm joined by a labor unionist, a labor trade unionist, but a giant of a gentleman. It is my pleasure tonight to start off and to kick off the season with none other than Mr. Michael Annisette, the General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center. Good evening and welcome, Mr. Annisette.
Yeah, pleasant morning to you and blessings to Trinidad and Tobago.
It is
to be on your program first time.
And that doesn't mean it first time, and definitely not going to be the last time. And I'm so glad to have you as my first guest as we kick off Season 2. Now, let's get into it. I have been reading an article, and just about a month ago, on the 15th of August, the Express, I believe, carried an article where you and Prime Minister Rowley clashed over, or had a war of words over the treatment of women and children. And it's really the first time where you have a trade unionist that's taking up such an important matter in Trinidad and Tobago. Tell me what ignited the discussion and fueled the fire between you and Prime Minister Rowley, in particular regarding the issue of treatment of women and children.
Okay, well, as a trade unionist, we are intimately involved with the interface of a lot of women and by extension, children. And one of the fundamentals that we will observe is that there's a lot of women who work in Trinidad and Tobago who are low-paying employees. And in most of the cases, they are single parents. And their ability to provide for their children is compromised by the fact that they are single mother, one. Two, and their wages are low. And as a consequence of that, the children in effect suffers in all different kinds of ways. And we were making the point, at least I was making the point, that we have the MTS workers who are very lowly paid as government employees. And when you offer these workers in the first instance 2%, and in the second instance, 4% over a 6-year period. What you are doing in effect is not addressing the real issues of the ability of these workers to maintain their children and to stop them from living from salary to salary. And I am saying that if we have a society that doesn't pay attention to that reality, I consider it a disrespect to the women and the children who are very critical to any country. Because the women bring forth the children, and the children will be our future. And therefore, we have a responsibility to ensure that they are treated in a manner that is worthy of what they bring to our society.
I concur with you. And I was reading the article, and you know, the Prime Minister sought to tell you that he pledged that you are a union leader and you have a job to provide the best representations for those that you lead. But he's a public official who, unlike you, had to swear an oath. But Mr. Annisette, if my memory serves me right, you have been a member of the Parliament, have you not?
Yes, I have been. I was a member of the Senate for about almost 2.5 years under the Patrick Manning regime when he would have called an early election.
And you were an independent senator, am I right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, yes.
So then, Dr. Rowley therefore has not done his homework because the same oath that he would have sworn as Prime Minister and as a Member of Parliament, you would have sworn that very same oath when you were appointed an independent senator. So, you know, you also understand what it is like to do not only trade unionism and represent the workers at the trade unionism level, but you do understand and you've had the experience of representing people, in fact, at the parliamentary level. And clearly the Prime Minister did not pick up on that. But with regard to, and you've gone into the 4% wage negotiation and the wage offer of 4%. I am sure you as a trade unionist have realized that the country is, and if the country hasn't realized that we are benefiting from higher prices of natural gas in the international market, and we should have been benefiting in a greater sense from the price of crude oil. But 4% over a 6-year period, what did you, as a trade unionist and as a former member of parliament, what would you say is appropriate, especially if, as you took up the plight for women, what would you say is an appropriate package for single mothers in particular in terms of wage negotiations?
Well, you see, we have a customary approach in negotiations which does not do justice to the whole concept of what we negotiate. Having said that, okay, we must understand what a 4% represents in reality. And we must take into consideration also that this negotiation has spanned over a 10 and 12-year period in some instances. So that what would have happened is that government employees, and let me make that distinction, that this issue is in respect to government employees as opposed to the private sector, who would have been within the said period given wage increase to a minimum of 18 to a maximum of 25% over the period of time that we are now discussing. And the question that we have to ask, why is it that government are getting a feedback, would have failed to honor their responsibilities to engage the workers and the union by extension into negotiations as is required by law in Trinidad and Tobago every 3 years. So that when you ask a worker in 2022 to live on a 2012 salary, you must understand, and anybody will understand, given the cost of living increases in Trinidad and Tobago over the 10 or 12 year period, that the offer of a 4% is an injustice, and it doesn't speak to the plight of workers. And I will dare say too, that what is happening is that the government have embarked on a policy of wage and salary depression as it for government employees. But more importantly, the very state government, they are willing to pay a contract worker much higher than a bona fide government employee for doing the same job. And it begs the question, is that the way you negotiate? And I have a particular saying that when you're negotiating a package, if you give me 4% across the board, and my salary is $50 an hour, and the next person's salary is $60 an hour, immediately you're going to see the disparity and the growing gap in salaries and wages, because a percentage increase on 15% or 20% or 30%, and one on 50%, 45% brings about a disparity, and it continues to grow and escalate in almost unimaginable proportions. So that what we need to do, and that is what we have been saying, we need to sit down, right, as the government and as the union, and take a look at all these issues and correct those anomalies that continues to exist year after year, contract after contract. E.g., the teachers who are critical component in Trinidad and Tobago, because if I can read and write, if I go to university, all right, it's a teacher, right, it's a lecturer, have me there, and I'm therefore, you need to put a value and a word to those groups of people who have been crying out for years for an evaluation that will speak to paying them the value that they bring to Trinidad and Tobago. And this is ignored by this government. And I will conclude by saying, we have concluded that there is a deliberate policy of this government, and I can demonstrate it, to depress wages. A deliberate policy, because if you look at over a 10-year period, you're going to realize that the allocation for wages, right, as part of the functional distribution of income and wealth have been falling for the workers, and more particularly government employees.
Ah, very well. You know, we're just on the cusp of taking our first break, but I like the discussion because there's so much that I want to bring into the discussion from a teaching and a learning aspect. So I want us to take a break now, and we take our first break, and when we come back, I want to delve into a little opportunity for us to teach the society about how we go about this wage negotiations, and and the role of the government, as you have put it, in terms of the lack that they have, the lack of proactivity in terms of the wage negotiations. So we'll be right back after these messages. welcome back. So let me start by asking, Mr. Annisette, I want you, for the benefit of the population who doesn't understand how we go about this wage negotiations, right? Walk us through what is the responsibility of the government in terms, without the coercion and without without the unions having to lobby, without the lobbying of the different trade unions. What is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Labor as it pertains to wage negotiations and the review of wages?
Okay, based on the Industrial Relation Act, the government as an employer, and in this instance, they are in effect employers, have a responsibility to meet and treat in good faith for the purposes of collective bargaining. First point. It is also a provision of the ILO convention, of which this government is signatory to, that you have to meet and treat in good faith with the union, one, and collective bargaining is one of the 8 principles that govern the ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, which is the only UN body that is tripartite in nature. And what I mean by that, it is the only UN body that comprises labor, government, and employers meeting to discuss issues and make recommendations and or conventions in the interest of social justice, decent wages, decent work, and everything that arises from that. It has been operational from since 1990, because one of the principles coming out of the war in 1990 is that they had recognized that if you don't have social equity, if you don't have sustainable development, right, your country is going to fail, and therefore this body was set up. So the government as an employer, not as a government, because the government is the largest employer in Trinidad and Tobago, they have a fiduciary responsibility to meet and treat and negotiate wage increases every 3 years. And how do we negotiate? We look at the cost of living, we look at the value of the worker dollars and dollar. We look at the other issues in terms of the workers' ability to buy goods and services, which keeps your economy going. And all those factors are placed into the basket to make a determination in the context of what kind of wages that you will pay these groups of workers for the services and the value that they bring to the government service. And the same principles apply in the private sector, but it is rather
boggling.
Right, that the government, or alternatively, that the private sector, who operates within the same economy of Trinidad and Tobago, would have given wage increases over that same period as much as 18 percentage points. No. But if your economy is doing bad, how do you justify as a government that the employers can generate sufficient monies to pay workers and live in decent wages, but you continue to depress wages by denying workers wage increases for over a 10 and a 12-year period? And that is the issue, you know, that because all this talk about the back pay and all these issues, had the government negotiated on a timely basis, we want to have the accumulation of the back pay. And let me make a final point. The National Insurance Board and the Port Authority, who pays their own wage bill, negotiated with my union, the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union, a 12% rather wage increase for port workers for 2014 to 2017. And the minister have to give the instructions to the board and the management, because the port is a statutory board which falls under the government. And to date, in 2022, the minister have failed or have neglect to give the instructions to the board and management so that the port workers can get their 12% wage increase that was negotiated in good faith and was acquiesced between the two parties around the negotiation table and signed off for. So it demonstrates a policy, as I said, of wage depression one, and the government conscious decision to not engage in meaningful negotiations and proper wage increases for government employees.
So let me ask you this, right? The former Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Prasad Bisasa, she would have, in her campaign in 2015, she would have talked about the 100 plus wage settlements that the government would have undertaken. And if we are calculating it right, this would have been in 2012, right?
Yeah.
Right. So what, there was a point in time when there was a love relationship between the government and the administration of Mrs. Prasad Bisasa, and then the love they fell out of love in the latter half of the administration, right? So tell me something. And I'm looking at it from a very political standpoint here. Is it that Mrs. Prasad Bisasa misled the population when she talked about the settlement of the wage negotiations? Because she campaigned on the settlement of wages that took place 3 years prior to the election. Is it that it was the responsibility of Mrs. Prasad Bisasa's government to settle the 2012 to 2015 period, and had that been done, it may have given her another fighting chance, a greater fighting chance, I should say, at the polls?
All right. Well, one cannot answer that because politics is fluid and evolving, and there are so many different factors that condition people in terms of what happened and how they vote. And I am not a political scientist, but I can say that from my experiences is that you need to put yourself in a particular place in order to address the question of who is going to run the government. And that is for the scientists and them, and also the politicians to understand, all right? Because sometimes it's not about what you offer. Sometimes it boils down to political party. It boils down to ethnicity. It boils down to race, which damages the very fabric of our society, which is something that I have always articulated, that we need to forget about who is UNC, who is PNM, who is Chuk Party, but you need to look at what those people bring to the table, and their action should determine how you respond when you are voting. And we have been making that mistake to the detriment of our country. So having said that, yes, there was a lot of outstanding negotiations when they came into power, and Minister Wademark was charged with the responsibility, and also my good friend who was a trade unionist,
Mr. McLeod.
No.
Mr. Indar Singh?
Yes, Mr. Industry was part of the team that was set up to meet and treat with the trade union movement to bring a level of relief, and we were able to get some negotiations out of the way. And as I told you, the 2014 to 2017 collective bargaining period, it was done under the UNC, but you may recall that the PNM came into power in 2015.
Yes.
Right? So then you have to understand that aspect as it relates to the port one, but the PNM was in power when PSA negotiated an increase for the workers at NIB, and the government have failed to date to give the instructions to implement those wage increases.
Okay.
So don't understand the dynamics. We're gonna get caught up in looking at the issues a wrong way, and therefore your conclusion is going to be flawed, because you must have all the facts in order to come up with a proper conclusion.
I am very happy that you said that, because you know you've cleared up a lot of things. It's very easy, and you're right. For those persons who, it's very easy for persons who don't understand that how the negotiations were done, and who don't understand that there is a responsibility by the government to look and to review salaries every 3 years in order, and you've quite eloquently highlighted what are the various variables that they look at to decide how much, and to decide what is the amount they would offer. Oh, and you also went into the fact that there's a 12% outstanding for NIB and PAT.
No. The 12% for port workers. And then may I add, for the benefit of the public, that I am advised that one of the rationales that have been given is that this was negotiated hastily by the port coming to an election time. But what they have failed to realize, that the 12% was conditioned on the port of bringing in certain best practices,
yes,
on the port, international best practices, so that the port would have grown and would have been able to compete competitively with the international market. And you see, that is pushed under the carpet.
Yes.
And then the narrative is, hey, look, as soon as election call, all right, and look, they went to negotiate something, right? But those negotiations took almost about 4 to 5 months, right? Drilled down on, in order to come up with that collective agreement that would have had the port, had the government implemented, operated in a much more efficient and productive way.
Okay. So I want to go in, okay, we are at 8:30. I want to take our second break. And when we come back, I want to discuss the 4% and your position with regard to, you took a bit of a middle ground as it pertains to the amalgamated security. So we take a break and we'll be right back.
Dolly's Place, a home for the aged. Our home care facility offers quality care for your loved ones. Our focus is providing exceptional services by people who truly care in an environment that promotes healing and wellness. Ideally located in Presal, we provide professional medical visits, nurse care, and clinical appointments. Living accommodation, companionship, and entertainment with 24-hour, 7-day supervision. We are passionate about serving the best food in style. Everyone knows our manager, Petra. At Dolly's Place, professionalism is the name of the game.
All right, let me just say thank you very much to Dolly's Place for my teacup, my tea mug, And I am encouraging all of y'all. Yesterday I had the opportunity to engage a little bit and do some community service work. And I want to encourage those of you all who are looking for a nice and safe place for your elderly folks, that Dolly's Place is really the place for you to take them. From my own personal experience, Dolly's Place, it's intimately named and crafted and shaped to and it's built on a legacy. So I want to shout out and say thank you very much to Dolly's Place and my friends at the Tropicus Hotel for their sponsorship of tonight's episode of The Real Politique. Now, coming back to Mr. Annisette, you were asked to comment on the acceptance of the 4% by the amalgamated security officers.
No, it's not security officers, workers, amalgamated workers who represent the daily rated workers in Port.
You see, it's very important for you to be on the show because you are explaining so much about the dynamics of labor. So you would tell me something. You took a very neutral ground as it pertains to the of them accepting the 4%, right? And I think a lot of people wondered why. The only person who could explain that is you. So why? Why did you take that very neutral position?
No, well, I'm trying to understand what you mean by when you say I take a neutral ground.
So your colleagues were up in arms about and were very upset that they felt betrayed that one of their comrades had accepted the 4%, and but you didn't express a level of aggression or a less. You didn't. Let's just say you didn't express, or you didn't put your dirty linen in the public's domain. You took a very mature, a very experienced position, I should say, with regard to the acceptance of the 4%.
All right, let me explain. The National Trade Union Center, for which I am General Secretary, would have condemned the action of the union. Okay, and I attempted to philosophize my approach to things like that. I would have expressed in the public domain that listen, all the unions, including this union, would have signed off on a protocol. And suffice it to say, the very amalgamated worker president, in the meeting that we had with the 15-point protocol, where we would have said that, listen, if there is any change of minds, we need to come back to the table among ourselves so that we can understand and move forward. And he was one of the trade unionists that would have been expressing concerns over, listen, we had to find a way for people to honor this contract, because people, when our minister called them, they will run by ministers and at that very meeting, I would have expressed, if you said, excuse me, comrade, could you explain what you are trying to say? All right, because I don't want to leave here, with what you're saying up in the air, and he got carried away. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, for the public to understand that the three daily rated workers, which was contractors and general workers, National Union of Government and Federated Workers and Amalgamated Workers Union, we agreed that we will go to the CPO collectively, because collectively we will demonstrate much more strength. And I, as the General Secretary of NATU, was given the responsibility to be part of the negotiating team, to be an advisor to the team. Having said that, we would have sat down as a team, the three unions. We spent nights and a few days together coming up with a proposal. And one of the fundamentals coming out of that, that we were rejected the 4% because all the analysis was done to demonstrate what are the implications of the 4% one. Because you remember, it was 2% first over an 8-year period. We must never forget that as workers in Trinidad and Tobago. All right, and then there was a big protest. Thousands of workers came out, and they went to 4% over a 6-year period. And if you divide 6 into 4%, you're going to see what it really represents for workers. And we were discussing, and we were to meet to give a collective counter proposal to the CPO's proposal, who was saying that he's not merchant cost of living, which is a standard practice for years, from years in negotiations. All right? And the CPO said, no, we can't afford that. End the text. And several of the issues. One of the issues was the question of pensioners, that there were no proposal for wage increases that would affect pensioners who are more vulnerable than workers who are working regularly. Because we will know what a pensioner means if you are a pensioner.
Correct.
You are on fixed income. And therefore, we must treat with these workers who would have given their lives and their livelihood and their sweat and blood for the government of Trinidad and Tobago. All right? So that when JTUM, which is the union federation that he belonged to, and may I add in the public domain, when Duke accepted the 5% wage increase over the 3-year period, he left NATU, right, and said he cannot trust Duke because Duke is, he betrayed the union because we were saying, if you remember, that we wanted more than 5% collectively. And that union under his leadership left NATU and went and joined JTUM because they said JTUM, he cannot sit in a federation with Duke, knowing that Duke broke the protocol and accepted 5% over the 3-year period when we had said no to that. So that I understood the anger and the pain of the federations and the unions when, under the leadership of Prentice, that he went behind our backs and negotiated, all right, a settlement of 4% when we collectively said that we was not going and accepted. And all I was simply saying, listen, Mr. Prentice, there are some things in life that we call principles. And a man must have a certain kind of characteristic and character about it. If you had a disagreement, all right, for whatever reason, right, on a principle, you had the right to come back and talk to us, given the fact that we collectively agreed that we were doing this thing collectively, and if there's any disagreements, that we will come back around the table and air it out. But you didn't do that. As a matter of fact, when the federation came down to meet him at 5 o'clock, because he agreed to meet them and hold his hand, only to discover that he was in fact meeting with the CPO behind our backs, and he went and signed the collective agreement clandestinely. But having said that, what I would have said, listen, I grew up with a philosophy that you have no control over what people say or what people think about you or any situation. What you have control over is how you see a matter and how you think about it. And I'm therefore to engage in the public spot, which I do not like. Right? Because I believe as a mature federations that our business must be discussed internally rather than being placed in the public domain. It is not in our best interest, one. And I'm therefore, I would have said, listen, allow him to go. We can't change what he would have done. You could talk now until the cow come down from the moon, he would have signed the agreement. Let us as the federations concentrate our efforts, right, on the non-acceptance of the 4% and strategize and to show how the 4% is not in the best interest of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, rather than engaging, right, in this public spat, right, with a fellow trade union. But it doesn't mean that I was not, that I was happy. I was unhappy, but you know, there comes a time in life you have to understand what life is all about. And if the rain falling, all right, and you can't go to work, you could make a noise that you want to make. You have to wait until the rain finish before you go outside there.
I like that.
And then that was my approach in addressing the particular issue.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Annisette. Why is there so many overarching organizations in the labor movement? So you have JTAM, you have NATUC. Why can't I mean, labor plays a very huge role, not only in employer-employee relations and worker rights, but labor plays a huge role in the overarching, in governance and in politics. Whether we like it or not, there's a huge role for labor in politics, and how we go forward in terms of governance, right? And part of good governance is also about ensuring that cost of living is at a satisfactory level, and people are able to live by the means by which they earn and all of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are so divided as a country at the political level. Is it that, why can't we have one huge overarching organization whereby all the trade unions that represent all of the workers of our great nation under one banner? Why is it that there's NATUC and there's JTAM? Why the differences in a movement that should have a similar or one ideology, in other words?
All right, okay. And again, I like how you put it, there should be similar ideologies. But in life, we must understand, and I want to make that particular point, that the right for people to have different ideologies is a democratic fundamental right that we have to respect. And if you don't understand our history, all right, as Trinidad and Tobago, you are not going to understand the dynamics that we are dealing with. All right, and let me make this point too. Check out France, and I could call several other countries. There isn't one federation for the very same reason that you are talking about. Ideologies, all right, who are more militant, who in the government pockets, and all those kinds of narrative have been part of our trade union and political landscape. And therefore, I have learned that, you see, in life, sometimes the right thing, in your view, is not really the right thing for everybody. And what you are saying might be correct, but that is not the reality. So that what happened? We had the first strike in 1919, which was the dock workers. You don't hear about it. We had the issues in 1937. And within the same 1937, there was this pulling and tugging in terms of who was the most militant leader. You remember we had Renzi Kola, we had Cipriani, right? We had Pla, all right, and then I can go on, C.P. Alexander, and I could go on and I could go on. And the camp was divided, as you rightly say, into ideological persuasion. And what does that mean? You will recall too, Doc, that we had what you call the Cold War.
Yeah.
We had the Russia and we had the America. And the two big countries, they were playing for the hearts, souls, and minds of trade unions within the Caribbean and across the world. And then you would have seen that in some countries, you have dyad communists, you have for social democrats, you have conservative, you have those who say they want to take a pragmatic approach rather than an ideological approach. And then all those persuasions creates the disharmony or the discontent. All right? Having said that, I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago that under Alan Alexander, we were able to merge the progressive trade union movement, which was headed by OWTU, and the Labour Congress, which was headed by the Vernon Gleans and the Carl Tulls, alright, the Natty Critchlows, who were deemed to be in the back pocket of the PNM. And it took us months to come together. Having said that, we came together and we lasted for a period of 5 years or 6 years. But when the conference was called at OWTU, and those are the historical facts that I'm saying.
Yes.
Because Robert Giuseppe, who belonged to the Labour Congress, who was deemed to be in the back pocket of the PNM, the progressive trade unions determined that they don't want to have anything to do with NATO, and they left NATO and they formed their own association. Right? That is the reality. As I speak to you now, what we have agreed is that we would work on common issues collectively as federations in the best interest of the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. And then the issue of ideology and all these things still arise because government will continue to try to infiltrate within trade union movements, right? So that they could have support within the trade union movement. And you may recall, and let us to be honest, the union that I belong to, S02EP01, was considered to be party group number 3 at the PNM.
Yes.
Right, because that is a reality, because we had the Codis, Ferreira, the Vernon Glean, the CP Alexander. I mean, we had Frank Warrell, Warrell, who was within the hierarchy of the PNM, right? We had Pico, and I can go on, and those are the historical facts. And then we had Fodi Ferreira, who you know was very close to Dr. Eric Williams.
Yes, very much so.
And at one time, you couldn't come on the port and say anything bad about PNM. Right? You would have had to leave the port maybe without your shirt on, right? Of so intense the love for the Eric Williams and the father of the nation and the PNM. All right, because we have to understand the historical factors governing the PNM, what happened, what Dr. Eric Williams did when he said, I'm going to let down my bucket because of the issues that he had at academia, and those are the realities. But you made a fundamental point which I agree with. At the end of the day, when you go to the market or the grocery, they never ask you if you belong to JTAM or not.
No, they don't.
You have any money to pay them.
Correct, very correct.
That point to say that the issue of the division, maybe at some point in time, we will transcend that. But the political parties still continue to work.
Mr. Annisette, let me interject and let's just take a short break. And I want to come back because we have the last 10 minutes of our show, and I want to touch with you your expectations for the budget. So let's take a break, and we'll be right back after the short break. Hello, this is Dr. Shane Mohammed, geopolitical scientist and lecturer. I invite you to join me for a new exciting show on IETV, 8 p.m. on Wednesdays. The Real Politique is not an ordinary talk show, but one of education, enlightenment, and examination. Here we discuss not just the surface issues, but the factors, shortcomings, and lack of will to change the socio-economic and political realities facing our nation. We ask the hard questions, seek out the difficult answers, whilst at the same time creating a space for dialogue and discussion which all of society can learn, understand, and hopefully respond actively and for the greater good of the Republic. This is the Real Politique. All right, and welcome back to a very pointed conversation. You know, Miss Annisette, you said that one day, hopefully that there would be a unification again of the trade unions. And I think in our country as a whole, you know, we are too divided as a nation by too many things and too many institutions. For example, we just celebrated our 60th anniversary, and there was the comment that Mrs. Prasad Bisesa and the opposition, they refrained from any of the celebrations, especially on Independence Day. And then there was the firing back that well, you know, Dr. Rowley and the opposition back then did not attend the independence celebrations of our 50th anniversary. And there's this always just tit for tat, and because they did this, we did that, and we have to act like that. You know, and actions of that sort does not take us and take generations like myself and the ones behind me, doesn't take us forward, and it puts us into a more divided and a fractured society that I'm afraid that by the time people like myself and others decide to get into the political fray and take up the mantle, our country may be too far gone. And, you know, at the end of the day, the heart and soul of the labor union is the livelihood of the people and the people that they represent. Now, just give me an idea. What do you think? And you're right, I'm looking at it, and it's 2012 to 2020. It's 10 years, and it's 10 years of no wage increases. And you all are negotiating for the period.
No, it's not 2022. We are now in 2022. Don't forget that.
Oh, so we are negotiating for
we are in 2022.
So we can't negotiate. Okay, very well. So we're looking at, you are looking at this negotiation for 4% over a 6-year period. This 6-year period that you're talking about is 2012 to 2018, right?
Yeah.
Right. What would you say is a reasonable percentage that will make the unions comfortable across the board and give us a chance for you all to come back to negotiate for 2018 to 2021 or 2019 to 2022?
All right. Let me put it in a way that people will understand. I have referenced the fact that we have private sector negotiations in Trinidad and Tobago over the very set periods, and their collective agreements are for 3 years. Right? Okay? And the private sector lives in the same Trinidad and Tobago.
Correct.
All right? 1, 2. And if you know about recession or hard times within any economy that will collapse, it's everybody suffering. 1. We have been able to demonstrate in Trinidad and Tobago that the financial institutions and more so the banks are declaring profits within a period that is almost raises questions as to whether or not we should outsource the government running to the private sector. You know, because if the private sector can survive within this economy. All right, why it is that the government cannot survive and why we always have an issue. And we have to begin to start a new narrative and look at what is happening in Trinidad from a different perspective. Because if we get tied up with the continuous narrative, because I don't talk about budgets again, because what is our budget in Trinidad and Tobago? The government comes, regardless of what you say, they put what they want, and they pound the table, yeah, and we are back to square one, because we still have to face in inflation, depression of wages, the question of the wrong allocation of funds, right? When you allocate funds to an institution, do we get an evaluation of what return that we would have gotten on the dollar in the context of the health sector?
Correct.
In the context of Ministry of National Security, which percentum of the budget would have climbed astronomically. And then what we are seeing within the trade union movement is that if it is, you are investing money within the Ministry of National Security and crime continues unabatedly. All right, we need to sit down and start to look at whether what we are doing is the correct thing. Because is it that we are throwing money or wasting money?
But Mr. Annisette, I want to come in here with you in this as we have a few minutes to go, right?
Yeah.
This government, from inception, has been one that has not been, for the lack of a better word, proactive. They have been, and I can't even say they have been reactive. They've been stagnated, and they have been self-stagnated. They've put themselves into self-stagnation. And by virtue of that, they've put our country and the economy, in terms of the public sector, into a highly bureaucratic. They've moved the government from the public sector from being one that was easy to do business with, to reversing it to one that is highly bureaucratic and highly paper trailed and highly procedural, right? The question I am asking is, I'm saying all of this to say to you that nothing that this government does at this point in time should be any surprise to any of us. And what is and you very rightly say that regardless of what is said by any of us in the pre-budget consultations, we continue to see that the government, well, I always believe, and you can agree or disagree with me, that once the private sector is showing that they are reaping profits on an annual basis, it means that our economy is strong. And one of the financial institutions that has continuously proven to show that they are reaping high profitability is First Citizens Bank, which is a government-owned institution. So if the state-owned financial institution is highly profitable and raking in large sums of money, it means that we are not doing bad at all as an economy. So somebody's lying somewhere. And the monies that are being earned is not being put into the good use and transferred into good governance, because I want your opinion on this before we close, but the Prime Minister said that there's going to be a new state organization formed for the refurbishment of roads. But don't we have NIDCO for that?
Yeah, but then again, now I hear what you're saying and I agree with most, but I want to differ in a little way. And I want to tell Trinidad and Tobago, until we begin to understand that we are the government, until we begin to understand what is our power as consumers within a society, as workers, as academia, all right, as an intellectual, as professional, as the ordinary person, right? Until we begin to understand the man in the mirror philosophy that the changes starts with us. Because if you wait for the person who is causing all the problems to change the problems,
they won't.
Well, I'm saying that you're no you're man. And then that is the narrative that we have to start, that the government must know that they are accountable to us and not we accountable to them. And we need to change the political structure. This maximum leader, that a prime minister could do whatever he wants. And when I talk, no dog bark. We need to get away from that colonial thinking and transition into a new cultural antecedents that speaks to our real culture and who we are as a people. And until we do that, we're going to be talking about this
for thy kingdom come.
And over. I have been articulated. We need to change the system because we inherit.
In order to do so, Mr. Annisette, and as we close, we require a political organization that has the ability to gather 31 seats in the parliament for us to make the changes.
No, we will need the political will of the people.
And we need
issues not on race, color, party,
but on matters that affect all of us.
Right. You understand what I'm saying?
I want to. You know, we've reached the end of our program, and I am out of time. But I would like to continue this discussion with you. So I would be in contact with you because I would like for you to be part of our budget discussions, which starts from next week Wednesday.
Yeah, all right.
And I also would like to talk with you on the topic of constitutional reform, which is something that I, as a political scientist, I am championing as well. So, you know, I would have to beg my producer, my director, for an hour and a half when we do those sessions. But I want to say thank you very much for joining me and for starting the second season of the Real Politique with such vigor and such spark. So, you know, we look towards the 26th, and we shall keep in touch. I did enjoy fully our dialogue this evening, and I want to say thank you very much for joining me on the Real Politique, and I look forward to seeing you again.
All right, the pleasure was mine, and I look forward to
more discourse. Thank you very much.
Right, in the future.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on the first episode of the second season of the Real Politique. I invite you to join in next week as we begin our discussions on budget 2022-2023. Good night, and God be with you.
Send me the link and I